a great engineering conquest of Africa. Threading its way through Central Africa is the mighty Zambezi. The idea of damming the Zambezi, first mooted about 40 years ago, is now becoming an actuality at Kariba. Soon, at this isolated place, a great dam will supply electricity for the Federation of Rhodesia and Nyasaland. The Kariba Dam will push back the waters of the Zambezi to form the world's largest man-made lake. Some 50 miles wide, it will stretch 200 miles upstream to within 40 miles of Livingston. At Livingston are the world-famous Victoria Falls, probably until now the only well-known feature of the Zambezi. It's a raging torrent during the summer flow, which is up to 80 times greater than the low flow in November, when it looks like this. Roughly 1,700 miles long, the Zambezi below the falls flows through wild country, the home of wild animals, and the home of the dreaded tsetse fly. Large tracts of this untamed country remain unfit for human habitation. Unfit for the white man, at any rate. This indeed is the forbidding Africa, which gave it the name of the Dark Continent.
You wouldn't be able to say white man today.
Before this becomes part of the vast Kariba Lake, over 80,000 Africans will have to be moved from their primitive homes to more fertile land. Some 240 miles below the falls, the Zambezi squeezes its majestic way through the rock-bound Kariba Gorge. This is wild, inaccessible bush country, visited by few white men, until the Kariba hydroelectric scheme was seriously considered. But this forbidding spot was chosen for modern man's greatest development project. From its earliest stages, the building of this ambitious hydroelectric scheme posed a tremendous ancillary problem, namely the housing of the 2,000 Europeans and 8,000 Africans engaged in its construction. In the face of world competition, Richard Costain Limited of Great Britain submitted their proposal for a vast housing scheme, and their tender was accepted by the Federal Power Board. The secret of their success depended on pre-planning and a determination to overcome difficulties in virtually uncharted territory. When the tender was accepted, surveyors fought their way into this roadless area to lay the foundations of a large and difficult project. As yet, onlookers were unmoved by the miracles to be wrought at Kariba. Within 48 hours of the contract award, the equipment began to move in, virtually fighting its way in foot by foot. But little by little tracks were made, opening the way to the working area. Bush was cleared and the wild game left of its own accord. But the first roads followed elephant tracks to the river, and so the spearhead enabled more and more equipment to be brought in. Altogether, £250,000 worth of equipment necessary for the completion of the £4 million township project. Labour was recruited from Nyasaland. The pioneers of this scheme suffered the tortures of heat and discomfort, meeting Africa at its very worst. Struggling up steep hillsides in temperatures of 120 degrees, they worked on, laying power lines for the temporary electric supply they brought with them, and facing the stifling task of winching heavy equipment up the slopes inch by inch. The whole project had to start from scratch, a pretty big scratch. Even sand had to be sought, the first raw material. Good supplies took some finding, but there's no shortage, in spite of the fantastic quantities required for the housing scheme, and indeed for the dam works themselves. Most of the sand is obtained from rivers entering the Zambezi just above Kariba. first use of the sand was for the making of sand cement blocks in portable machines. Originally, as you see, this work was done out in the open. Owing to the intense heat, most of this sand cement block making was done at night, and keeping them moist during the curing period required 9,000 gallons of water an hour, 24 hours a day. The blocks were made, matured, and stockpiled by the million. Within a few months, the production of sand cement blocks was stepped up and provided Kariba with its first factory, a sizable unit, as you can see from these aerial shots. The next important raw material was stone, which was quarried high up in the hills, permitting gravity to do most of the conveying. The stone was tipped to a crushing and screening plant, being broken down to sizes suitable for whatever concrete conglomerate was specified for numerous jobs. Thanks to careful planning, hillside chutes delivered the crushed stone to the lorries. Sand is plentiful on the river banks, but when tropical rains bring the rivers down in flood, such sources are cut off. For this reason, the river sandbanks were worked continuously, and what couldn't be used immediately was stockpiled into enormous dumps above flood level to provide an uninterrupted supply. Water, of course, was drawn from the Zambezi itself, the pumps mounted on a ramp to be adjusted to the river's fluctuations. But higher up, water purification works were built to provide pure water for construction as well as drinking. At the highest point, a reservoir was constructed for the township. Another essential project of high priority was the building of a temporary power station. This in itself was a major undertaking of the utmost urgency. But before the system of power lines was completely erected, the diesel-operated power station was supplying current. So much had to be built at once. So much was essential. The control tower at the airstrip was completed in 10 days and nights, and was ready in time for the arrival of the first Italian tradesmen, flown from Italy to step up Costain's building program. Sufficient local labor could not be called in without upsetting the Federation's labor balance. With the arrival of the Italians, the tempo of work was increased. Foundations were poured in scores of places. Raw Africans from the Azaland were showing the results of training in increased proficiency. The whole project of building the Kariba Heights Township was slipping into top gear. Cheap to produce, ideal for speedy erection and for climatic conditions, loads of sand cement blocks flowed steadily to all parts of the area. Amid an orderly chaos, a well-planned township was rising from the primeval African bush country. With centuries of building in their traditions, Italian tradesmen were working side by side with African laborers with no such antecedents. The results were magnificent. The double-story blocks for bachelors were taking shape. At the same time, houses were being built as fast as roads were constructed and essential services such as drainage could be laid down. And quite apart from meeting the demands for individual housing, communal requirements were well on their way, such as a school. The entire contract called for completion in 2 years, but careful planning, organization, drive, and close cooperation with the consulting engineers were already reducing this period.